Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the latest Tech Talk on IEEE 802 networking standards, and today we're focusing on the 802.18 Radio Regulatory Technical Advisory Group. My name is Jennifer McLean. I'm Senior Manager of Education Products with IEEE Educational Activities, and I will be helping to moderate today's event. IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. Please note a few housekeeping items before we get started. At the bottom of your screen are engagement tools that are resizable and movable, so you can move them around to make the most out of your dashboard space. If you have questions for today's panelists, you can submit them through the Q&A widget on your screen or click the purple Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many questions as time allows. If you click the green resources icon at the bottom of your screen, you'll find more information about IEEE 802 standards and past and future virtual events. Finally, the on-demand link for today's Tech Talk will be emailed to all registrants approximately 2 hours after we finish. If you'd like to tweet about this event, please use the hashtag IEEELearn. Our panelists today are Paul Mikulich and Jay Holcomb. Paul is chair of IEEE 802 Landman Standards Committee, overseeing 75 active technical standards and the 50 concurrent projects for wired and wireless networking applications. Jay is a spectrum regulatory engineer for Itron Inc., and since 2018, he's chair of IEEE 802.18, the Radio Regulatory Technical Advisory Group. I'll now turn it over to Paul to get us started.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you very much to Educational Activities for hosting these Tech Talks. I apologize to everyone. Our video, Jay's video and my video, is not functioning today, so we're going to be audio only. As some of you may know, IEEE 802 develops technical standards for the networking marketplace. Our mission is to develop high-quality, market-relevant standards. And one of the very important topics within 802, since a significant amount are wireless, is access to the radio frequency spectrum, and to ensure that we comply and influence the laws that govern that access. So we're very fortunate today to have Jay Holcomb, who is the chair of 802.18. We have a group that's focused on developing radio regulatory positions on behalf of the 802 working groups. So thanks, everybody. Today should be an interesting talk, and I just want to mention that the views that you hear today are mine and Jay's and not the IEEE's. So let's get started. And Jay, please explain the mission of the Radio Regulatory Technical Advisory Group.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer and Paul, and welcome everyone. Hey, appreciate being here and sharing with you the Radio Regulatory Tag and what it's all about and the importance to the IEEE 802 standards that are developed. Primary mission for the Radio Regulatory Tag is supporting the wireless, the different wireless working groups. Today, the active ones are 802.11, which is wireless LAN, but most people know it as Wi-Fi. And then 15, the wireless specialty networks, and kind of as its name, specialty networks that have different standards. Some of the examples are for standards for smart utility networks. There's ultra wideband, and there's also terahertz communications up to 300 gigahertz. And then all the working group 802.19 are the standards for coexistence among the other standards, and they also do recommended practices. Supporting these working groups, the Radio Regulatory Tag does for their development of IEEE 802 standards and amendments that are used around the world. And all of these working groups are developing standards that operate in the radio frequency spectrum. So a key point with this is that the RF spectrum is very limited commodity, and as such is regulated by government bodies to protect licensed and authorized license exempt users. Therefore, 802.18, the radio regulatory tag, works with different government bodies on spectrum availability. Both with the regulators, what they are doing, the IEEE that can connect with the IEEE 802 standards. We need to consider what the regulators are doing with their standards, and we also provide feedback to the regulators what would be good for the standards and for everybody to use.
Okay, excellent, Jay. Jay, just for the people that are listening in, can you give people a sense of who participates in the radio regulatory tag? I think it's important to emphasize that everything we do in 802 is wide open, and in order to participate, you simply need to show up and attend a meeting. But if you can just give an order of magnitude, how many people do participate in 802.18, Jay?
Oh, sure. Our current voting member roster is in the neighborhood of about 45 people from many, many different affiliations and companies and actually countries around the world. So,
right,
and
right.
we have weekly meetings, and we go to all the 802 meetings when we can. So it's a very active group.
Yep. Global representation, technical experts from all over the world representing a variety of interests. So, okay, great, Jay. So for those that may not be familiar with regulators and regulations, why are they necessary, Jay?
Well, yeah, that's actually a very good point, and it's getting to be more important as technology advances. But as Ted touched on, the RF spectrum is a very limited resource. And with so many uses out there, there needs to be some control of who can use what spectrum and how the users, so that all the users can still have good quality of communications. We don't want everybody using the same spectrum at the same time. The communications would not work well. So you need some regulation. And therefore it's controlled through the government bodies and regulators. And it's generally on a country basis in most parts, but there is also some regional regulatory bodies also. And two good examples are ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standards Institute for Europe. They create standards that are used there. And then the Federal Communications Commission here in the USA. And then one note about, even though the way the European Union works with the multiple countries there, ETSI provides the harmonized standards that are used for all the member countries, but each individual country, I'm coming back to the country part of it, each individual country still has their own rules, but they do respect the overall ETSI standards. And then being between the European Union and the FCC here in the U.S., being that these are larger countries and regions and their presence is more significant around the world, many smaller countries, but not all, but many smaller countries will model their rules after ETSI and FCC standards, either model their rules or just use their rules. So, and then one last primary regulator that we work with is the International Telecommunications Union and the radio communication sector part of that. And this is an international regulatory body that looks at it from a global perspective. And then they provide rules and recommendations and helps all the countries work together with their communications, because as you can visualize, radio communications doesn't stop at country borders. It definitely goes across the borders. So the ITUR helps globally. So these are the three primary regulatory bodies that the radio regulatory tag works with.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you, Jay. So my understanding is there are two classes of regulations. There's the licensed set of regulations and the license exempt or unlicensed set of regulations. Can you explain the differences between the two of them?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Paul, and how it's progressed over time between the licensed and the unlicensed. Basically, licensed use is where individuals apply and obtain a specific license to use specific frequencies or channels in specific geographic areas. So very controlled. And then they have exclusive use. There's nobody else using that channel in that geographic area and so forth. But you do have to apply, and there's different rules and regulations. Where unlicensed frequency ranges allow for many products that anyone can use, and it's not exclusive use. Wi-Fi is a great example. Wi-Fi uses unlicensed frequency ranges. Therefore, think about it. Your phone has Wi-Fi, and everybody can use that. And our standards, the IEEE 802, for example, creates it so that everybody can use that unlicensed frequency with the proper equipment and the proper standards, and then everybody can work on it together. But you don't have to get a license. You can just get the equipment and use it, and everything allows for good quality of communications. So both licensed and unlicensed, or a license exempt is used globally as the term, have many different models. There's rules and regulations, and the different regulatory bodies in the different countries will control those. There is some common rules and regulations, but it's still on a country-by-country basis.
Okay, very good, Jay. Yeah, so an analogy might be, if you were to look at it from a property point of view, you have private property where you have exclusive rights to use that property, and public space where people need to figure out how to share it and coexist. So coexistence is a big requirement in the unlicensed world. Very
exactly.
Good. Yep. Tell us a little bit about the global regulators we've got up on the slide here.
Oh, sure. Well, as I mentioned, the ITUR, or ITU is the primary, and then the radio communications sector, ITUR, looks at things globally, as I already mentioned. But you get down to regions, and here you can see on the slide, for example, the CEPT looks at the European region. Asia Pacific Telecommunity, APT, looks at the Asia Pacific region, and you can see the others listed on the slide. And what these are kind of in between the country level and the ITUR. And then these regional groups, consider what they have in their own regions, which, in Asia may be different than in the Americas, for example. So they work with the country regulators in those regions on common needs and requirements that are there. It's just a layer in between the countries and the global aspects.
Right. Okay, very good. Thank you, Jay. Let's zoom in to the FCC and give a little bit of a detailed example of how things are sliced up.
Oh, right. Well, yeah. So as I've mentioned several times, is that radio spectrum is very limited in its use. It's a finite commodity, and everybody wants to use that finite commodity. So as you can see in this particular chart, extremely busy, I understand, but that's the point, is this chart goes from the radio frequency of 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. So there's a lot of frequency represented in the chart, and what all those different colors and so forth are different users, different industries, different markets, different uses in operation. Television, radio, amateur radio, unlicensed, and so forth, radars, satellites, all of those different industries that use the radio frequency. Well, really, primarily, the only open frequency that's not assigned to one user or multiple users is 3 to 9 kilohertz up in that top left. Everything else is being used by one or more different users. And you can see some circles and ovals down in the last three rows. Actually, there's one in the fourth from the bottom too. Those are spectrum that we have IEEE 802 standards in those radio spectrum frequencies. And you can see there's several of them in there, but how they kind of fit into the overall spectrum. Now, again, this is the U.S., and they're similar for Europe and similar to all the other countries too. But it's just to show how busy the spectrum is.
Okay, very good. Jay, in those circles, there are multiple different colors. Those represent different services that are running in those slices of spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you can see that using a particular frequency range, you still need to share with other users. And then the regulators make sure that the rules allow for the multiple users to use those, to share those frequency ranges, and everybody still gets good quality communications.
Right, right. So an example of some services that run in the same spectrum as 802 would be Bluetooth, and you mentioned the ultra-wideband, and then there's some other interferers like microwave ovens and things like that. And I know that because the spectrum is so crowded, some of the services that in the past were traditionally restricted to licensed are moving into the unlicensed spectrum. And coexistence and fair sharing is a really hot topic for the industry overall. So, okay, very good. Thank you, Jay. So let's talk about the future a little bit. Well, my slide is not advancing. Oh no. Jennifer or Johanna, can you advance the slide one chart, please? I am unable to advance.
Yes.
It advanced here, Paul?
Yeah, it's well, it's not showing advanced on my screen, so I don't know what's going on. What's showing on right now?
Looking to the future slide is on.
Oh, it's on? I don't see it. Okay, something's wrong with my representation. Okay, so I'll just wing it. Looking to the future. All right, so Jay, tell us what are some of the hot topics going forward in radio regulatory?
Well, you already mentioned about the coexistence and the sharing, and in the last 10, 15 years, whatever number you want to put on it, sharing spectrum by multiple users is going to be a major effort of late and moving forward. The wireless applications are just expanding at an exponential rate. More and more and more uses of the radio spectrum are coming on board. Look at your cell phone, for example. It's got cellular, and it's got Wi-Fi, and it's got Bluetooth, and it's got near field, and it's got all of those different radios in there using different spectrum. And so the sharing of spectrum is just a major effort by all the industries and regulatory bodies, as you pointed out on the previous chart. So that is really a big one that continues to be out there. And then, of course, you still got to consider the different countries and regions and make sure everything works. Everybody can use the spectrum equally and get good communications. One of the things, though, too, the next thing that kind of comes to mind is this connectivity and using all of these spectrums and all of these different radios. Well, something that's been seen, especially with the pandemic of late, the internet and connectivity has been so important for everyone. It's, a lot of us take it as routine and we have it and it works. But there are so many people that don't have it. They don't have connectivity. They don't have availability to the internet, and they're falling behind. So many of the regulators are working closely to close this, what they call the digital divide. I think everybody's probably heard of that one time or another. So I think many of the regulators are working it and making some improvements, but there's a long ways to go yet to get everybody equally connected around the world in all countries and everywhere. So, and a lot of our IEEE 802 standards, again, Wi-Fi is a good example, can really help with that. But we need the regulator support also.
Okay,
so IEEE 802 will continue to work with all the wireless groups on these different standards that can help.
Very good, Jay. So, yeah, what we've been doing in 802, like, for instance, 802.22 is an early instance of the cognitive technologies, right? Mm-hmm. Where you are operating in a slice of spectrum that previously was dedicated to licensed use, but because it's relatively lightly used, the TV bands, we searched out the portions of the spectrum where they're not currently being used in a particular area, and then we're allowed to transmit in that particular spectrum, correct? That's the cognitive radio aspect?
Oh, right, exactly. And that's, there's many different sharing techniques, and that definitely is one of them.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Just so everyone knows, my On24 platform is completely gone, so I'm just operating off of my handwritten notes now. So I don't see any of the questions that may have come in or anything at the moment. So if Joanna or Jennifer, if you can, or Jay, can you see the questions as they're coming in?
I have the question window up. I have not seen any questions.
Okay. Well, we'll go with some.
I can help you with that. Yep, too. So one question is, how can people, get involved with this group?
Jay, why don't you take that?
Well, okay. I'm trying to think. So for the 802.18, it's part of the IEEE 802. So it is open. You can join the IEEE and become a member of 802, and then there is websites out there. I'm trying to think, Paul, what's the best way to connect with IEEE 802?
Well, actually, you don't need to be an IEEE member to participate in IEEE 802. Right. You can just be an interested party, and the best way to connect would be to go to the 802 webpage, which is IEEE802.org, and you'll see a list of all the groups that are comprise 802. 802.18 is one of them. And if you were to click on that link, you'd be able to get information about what's currently going on within 802.18. And as Jay pointed out, he has weekly teleconferences, typically Thursdays from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And those are open. If you go, once again, to the 802 webpage, you'll see a link for a calendar, and that'll provide you the coordinates to participate in that activity. Yeah, one of the benefits of COVID has been we've gone all electronic, so that it's a lot easier for people that traditionally would not have been involved in 802 to get involved and to be passive observers or active contributors. So I would encourage you to come listen in to Jay's weekly telecon. And you've got one coming up. When's your next one, Jay?
Well, it'll be tomorrow. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Right.
So if you go to the resources link, you'll see links to the Radio Regulatory Advisory Group and how to get involved with 802. So I encourage anyone that's listening in that has interest, please join us.
Yeah, and for Paul's not able to see the screen, but that top line, IEEE802.org, is all of the working groups, and then /18 will get you to the 18 webpage where there's information for connecting to the meetings, when the meetings are, and so forth.
Okay, very good. Any other questions, Jennifer, or I've got a few that I can ask myself.
Yes, go ahead with your question.
Okay. So explain how the radio regulatory group interacts with a regulator, such as the FCC. Like, what's the protocol that you use?
Oh, okay. Yeah, FCC is a good example, but I also want to make, we also work with like ACMA out of Australia, Ofcom in the UK, IMDA in Singapore. But from an FCC, for example, they'll put out a notice of proposed rulemaking as an FCC terminology. Generically or more globally, it'll be a consultation is more of a global term. The regulators will put out a consultation and on a particular subject, a particular need, looking for feedback from the outside, from the industry, from standards bodies, and so forth. It might be on they want to change some rules in the unlicensed bands or in these particular unlicensed bands, for example. So the regulator will put out a consultation, or the FCC puts out what they call a notice of proposed rulemaking. And 802, 18 in particular, but really all of the 802 groups may, but 18 in particular will review that consultation or NPRM from the FCC. And, does that have an interest to the 802 working groups, any part of the 802 working groups? And if it does have an interest, then we can write up comments, and an 802.18 regulatory tag will be kind of the prime focus for that. We'll write up comments back to the regulator saying, you should consider this, or don't forget about that, or, maybe this wasn't such a good idea, it hasn't worked in the past. So we'll come up with what we think the regulator is looking for that will help expand the 802 standards too, and basically collaborate with them, work with them. And so then we can provide them comments, and a lot of times our comments will get posted into their rules, regulations, and their output from the regulators. So that is the most common way that we interact with the regulator.
Okay, very good, Jay. I've rebooted my application, and it looks like you should be able to see me now. So hi, everyone. So there's a lot of regulators that you're interacting with. How do you track the activities in such a diverse set of regulators, Jay?
Well, yeah, that's very good, and it's something we're always open for better ideas and so forth. Primarily, there's two primary ways, and it's our actually 802 volunteer members come into play here. A lot of the different members that are affiliated with different companies or themselves, a lot of them are just self-affiliated. They have relationship or interest in different regulators or different regions or different countries. And so they're paying close attention, or they're actually participating. In Europe, there's different groups within ETSI or CEPT, for example, and we have several members that participate actually in those particular groups at the regulators. And then they're, paying attention to what's going on, and then they will bring it into 802.18 in our meetings, in our email list servers and so forth. And will let us know, hey, India's put out a new consultation on this. Should we look at that? So the members themselves will be participating in different regulatory bodies or paying attention and bring it in. Or I guess the second one is just looking on the web. I'm on several email lists, like from the FCC or from Europe or for ITUR. I'm on mailing lists. So I will get notices that there's a consultation coming up. And then that's a good way to find out what's going on and where the different regulators are. And then that way you can connect in with many regulators around the world. You don't have to focus on just a few. So those are the two main ways.
Okay, very good. Hey Jay, here's a hot topic, 5G, and I know that some of the 5G technologies are currently designed to operate in the license-exempt spectrum. So, how does 802 coexist with some of these newer 5G technologies?
Oh yeah, very good, Paul. Yeah. It's unlicensed for use, as you mentioned, that 5G is going to have some unlicensed band uses, for example. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, in unlicensed, the regulators are putting out rules and regulations to make sure that everybody follows the rules and regulations, and when they do, you can coexist. And we have worked with the cellular group, 3GPP, and they worked with us, and we work to coexist with each other in the unlicensed spectrum. So we do expect that the sharing should be just fine in those spectrums. Right.
Yeah, it requires a high degree of cooperation between these two vastly different sectors, and it's been working out okay so far. So okay, Jay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Another technology that we recently have started working on again inside of 802 is ultra-wideband, and I briefly mentioned that earlier, but it's an interesting technology. It's very different from the narrowband work that's going on. Maybe you could explain how ultra-wideband figures into the radio regulatory environment.
Yeah, that's a specific example, I guess, of a technology that we needed to work with the regulators on. Ultra wideband is, as it says, it's wideband. It covers a lot of spectrum. If you remember the chart from the FCC where there were slivers, little vertical slivers through all of there. Well, the ultra wideband will cover many of those slivers, those frequency ranges at one time, and can actually cross over different licensed bands or unlicensed bands at the same time. And the situation there is we've worked with the regulators on what can we do to create that technology that crosses all of these different frequency ranges and spectrum and still coexist and not interfere with anyone. And the technology was a very low power technology. The idea was they wanted to cover a lot of bandwidth for the speed and so forth. And it's low power, and the regulations were created so that they didn't interfere with the licensed or unlicensed folks. And so that's kind of how that worked. Again, very low power, and it works well with the others per the regulations.
Okay, very good, Jay. And last question is the dedicated short-range communications technologies has been a really important topic for your group, I know, over the past several years. Maybe you can touch on some of the challenges associated with that particular technology. That's been kind of an interesting one for the IEEE 802 and 802.18. This is a spectrum up in the 5.9 gigahertz range that was used for vehicular communications, if you will. And it started out many years ago, and IEEE 802 did create a standard for that. But over the years, because it's in the automotive industry and so forth, it's taken a little time to get, and it's safety related, it's taken a little time to get going. Well, other technologies have come on board since then. So we've
we have continued, IEEE 802 has continued to develop the standard, and in fact, in the last year or two, they've created some, working on some amendments for that standard. But in the meantime, like I said, other technologies have come on board. And so, for example, with the FCC, FCC started looking at these other technologies. Well, they sent out an NPRM and NPRM and different consultations and so forth. IEEE 802.18, along with the working groups, have developed comments and sent back to the FCC, and a lot of comments. It's been a lot of work. But the FCC still is kind of looking at a different direction, still kind of in the middle of it. And so we continue to work there. However, other countries are still using that DSRC spectrum, so our standards will still work in other countries just fine.
And it's a very important
one where we work hard, but that's where it's at.
Yeah, it's a very important technology, and the regulations are critical because this is going to govern how vehicles communicate with one another, and from vehicle to infrastructure, from the vehicle to the road. And that's going to be an important part of assisted driving and autonomous driving. So that's a particularly important area because it's safety related. You've got lives at stake here. So, okay, Jay, we've reached the bottom of the hour. We've gone a little bit over. I apologize for that. I apologize for the snafus associated with the platform. But that's what happens every once in a while. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer to wrap it up. Jennifer?
Thanks, Paul. We've come to the end of today's event, and we'd like to thank you very much, Jay and Paul, for your time and for this important discussion. As noted earlier, the on-demand link for today's event will be emailed to everyone in approximately 2 hours. We encourage you to register for our next IEEE virtual event called Bridging the 4G, 5G Gap, which is beginning on March 10th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. And you can find a link to register for that event in the resource list. And before you leave, please complete our feedback survey via the survey tool at the bottom of your screen. And we thank you for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Educational Activities. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. Glad to help out.